Hello everyone! Today our team will be presenting our research titled Examining Identity-Driven Bias in Language Model Responses to Mental Health Prompts. In this study, we investigated whether explicitly disclosing a user's LGBTQIA+ identity influences how ChatGPT responds to mental health-related questions. We'll begin by providing some background on the topic, introducing our research question, and outlining the objectives of our study.
A large language model, also known as an LLM, is an AI system that has been trained on large collections of text. Existing research on LLMs concentrate on correctness, harm reduction, and improving performance. Yet there is a knowledge gap, so we propose the following research question. How does an LGBTQIA+ individual's explicit identity affect the characteristics of responses generated by ChatGPT in mental health-related contexts? To confront this question, we constructed a dataset containing mental health-related questions and used 3 different experimental conditions.
To investigate whether identity disclosure influences ChatGPT's response, we designed a 5-phase methodology. First, we randomly selected 100 mental health questions from the Council Chat dataset, covering topics such as depression, anxiety, self-esteem, and relationship dissolution. We then created 3 versions of each question: the original question with no identity disclosure, one that explicitly identified the user as heterosexual, and one that explicitly identified the user as LGBTQIA+. For each of these prompt variations, we generated 3 independent responses using ChatGPT 5.3 Auto, resulting in a total of 900 responses. Running each prompt multiple times helped to reduce random variation and provide a more reliable dataset. Finally, every response was independently coded using predefined bias-related variables. After completing our classifications, any disagreements were discussed and resolved through a consensus, creating the final dataset used for our analysis. After analyzing all 900 responses, we found that response quality remained consistent across all 3 experimental conditions. ChatGPT continued to provide complete and relevant answers regardless of whether identity was disclosed. However, as shown in our comparison table, we observed clear differences in how the responses were framed. Responses to LGBTQIA+ explicit prompts contained substantially more identity acknowledgement and were more likely to include additional identity-related content, even when it was not directly relevant to the user's question. We also found that some LGBTQIA+ responses contained subtle identity-based assumptions and mild stereotyping, whereas these patterns were much less common in the original and heterosexual conditions. Overall, our findings suggest that the primary differences were not in the correctness of ChatGPT's responses, but in how the responses were framed, the emphasis they placed on identity, and the assumptions they made. This highlights the importance of evaluating AI systems not only for factual accuracy, but also for fairness and consistency across different user identities.
For the impact of our research, it's first important to understand who's going to be benefiting from it, and mostly it's going to be people in minority groups such as LGBTQIA+. And what happens is sometimes these people have problems such as mental health or other personal struggles, but they don't go to face because they're uncomfortable in doing so to get help. So what they do is they go to AI to get help through its responses from their questions. But what happens is AI sometimes doesn't give their best responses, or as we've seen through our research, it sometimes gives subtle biases or stereotyping through its answers. So it's important to understand how it kind of shifts its tonality and framing depending on the questions we give, so that we can change the framing of our questions and how we kind of ask the questions in AI, so that when people do so, they can get the best responses and the most helpful responses. And this will therefore create inclusivity in your community and allow a space where everyone, can kind of feel safe and have somewhere where they can talk to get help on their problems.
Future directions for this study would include using other available large language models or other iterations of the ChatGPT model, and expanding the study to include other commonly marginalized identities. These steps would allow for a greater increase in the external validity of the study and make the results more generalizable to a broader population. This study highlights how the use of AI is more than just preventing obvious bias. Even subtle differences in how identities are interpreted can shape the way support is delivered. As large language models become increasingly integrated into mental health care, they must strive to provide not only equal advice, but equitable reasoning for every user.